Christianity is coming back into public schools, and we need to talk about it. All right, let's move over to the South and talk about some education bills in the Bible Belt. We've already talked about Texas and we've mentioned Florida briefly, but there is so much more in the works, specifically in Louisiana, Georgia, and South Carolina. Let's start with Louisiana, which has essentially laid the groundwork for some of the aforementioned bills regarding the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms. As we've talked about, some states have pending bills to include the 10 Commandments and posters or frame copies in public school classrooms. But in Louisiana, that bill was already passed into law. Louisiana House Bill 71 was passed in June of 2024, and it went into effect in January of 2005, despite an opposing ruling from a federal judge. Now, like the other acts, this one in Louisiana requires all classrooms in the state to display either a framed copy of the 10 Commandments or a poster. The size is a bit smaller. The requirement is only 11 by 14 inches, but the commandments still need to be in a large font that is legible. This bill also differs slightly from the ones in other states because it includes a requirement that each display include a so-called context statement about why including the 10 Commandments is important. It's essentially 3 paragraphs talking about how previously schools and textbooks incorporated the 10 Commandments into public education. The bill also explicitly says that the schools don't have to use their funds to buy the posters, which I guess is good, but they still have to get them. So how are they going to do that? They can either accept donated funds or donated posters. But what if they don't get the donations? Is there an organization that is going to just hand out funds or posters to every school in the state? Probably not. A later section in the bill says that free materials will be provided, and they're available online, but that doesn't cover the printing costs, which would be quite high if you're going to print out fairly large posters in color for every single classroom in your school, right? And also, get this, it's not just K through 12 schools that are required to do this. It is post-secondary schools as well, or public colleges and universities. Now, how in the world did this get passed? Well, let me tell you. The bill has an introduction listing reasons why putting the 10 Commandments in the classroom is actually constitutional. It claims that the 10 Commandments are a core part of U.S. history and faithfully reflects the understanding of the founders of our nation with respect to the necessity of civic morality to a functional self-government. Now, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of how the 10 Commandments and Christianity are not foundational aspects of this country in this particular video. However, I do want to point out that this bill has cherry-picked information to defend its reasoning of why including the 10 Commandments in the classroom is constitutional. And some of that information that it has cherry-picked is sometimes incorrect. So we're going to take a look at it in detail. Now, first of all, it cites the Van Orden versus Perry case, which ultimately approved a monument of the 10 Commandments on Texas state capitol grounds. Now, while this case established that it was constitutional to include this monument on state grounds, the dissenting opinion from Judge Souter explains how a previous case, Stone versus Graham in 1980, specifically discussed displaying 10 Commandments in public school classrooms. And that case determined it was completely unconstitutional. And the reason being is twofold. One, the 10 Commandments are a sacred text in Jewish and Christian faiths. And 2, the commandments do not confine themselves to secular matters, instead discussing how you must only worship one God and not take that God's name in vain. So in this bill in Louisiana that has been passed into law, it is mentioning one specific case that said you can have a monument of the 10 Commandments on government grounds, but it's conveniently overlooking a more relevant case about having the 10 Commandments in public education and how that case determined it was unconstitutional. So you're taking something that doesn't necessarily apply in this case and saying, oh, well, that's constitutional, so now in public classrooms it is constitutional, and we're just conveniently ignoring the case that determined having the 10 Commandments in public classrooms was unconstitutional. Isn't it convenient to ignore evidence that doesn't align with the views that you want to promote? Doesn't that sound like confirmation bias? Maybe. Now, this bill's introduction also states the American Legion versus American Humanist Association case, saying that it ruled that the displaying of the 10 Commandments on public property may have multiple purposes such as historical significance and represent a common cultural heritage. Now, interestingly, this case had nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. It was specifically about portraying a cross on public grounds. Does the case mention the Ten Commandments? Yes, but primarily in reference to the case about the monument in Texas. So I see this as a secondary source because this case isn't about the Ten Commandments. It references a previous case. So here's the case in Texas, and this case about the cross references this case. So we're looking at a secondary source, right? And it just feels a bit dishonest to include this case as yet another reason to include the Ten Commandments in the classroom when this case doesn't even directly talk about the Ten Commandments and just references a previous case. And finally, the third reason that this book claims that including the Ten Commandments in the classroom is constitutional is because James Madison supposedly wrote the following: "We have staked the whole future of our new nation upon the capacity of each of ourselves to govern ourselves according to the moral principles of the Ten Commandments." Surprise, surprise, this is not a real quote from Madison. Okay, talk about fake news, right? Madison actually vehemently opposed the mixing of government and religion. And this quote, supposedly from Madison, has been debunked numerous times that he did not actually say this. So out of the three reasons that we have for defending the use of the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms, the first one is valid but ignores evidence to the contrary. The second one is a secondary source referring back to the first one. And the third one is just simply false. Okay, so these are supposed reasons for the constitutionality of including the Ten Commandments in the classroom. And I have found errors in each and every one of them. Again, I struggle to understand the thought process that these legislators have when writing these laws. I really struggle how highly educated people can write these things and think, yeah, that is a solid argument. I don't get it. Now, remember how I said a federal judge opposed this law? Well, District Judge John DeGravels, sorry for my pronunciation, recognized just how unconstitutional this bill was, and he rejected a state mandate telling schools to post the Ten Commandments. However, supporters of this bill obviously found a workaround. So according to the state's Attorney General, Liz Murrill, the judge's ruling can only apply to 5 local school boards named as the defendants in the pending lawsuit. All the other 67 school districts are subject to the law. Convenient, huh? The Attorney General, Liz Murrill, also came forward in January with some helpful guidance on how to constitutionally post the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms. She says, and I quote, "As I have repeatedly said, House Bill 71 is plainly constitutional because there are constitutionally sound ways to implement it. Like not hanging the Ten Commandments behind the teacher's desks because that would give an impression that the teacher specifically supports it. But having the school support it, is that any better? I don't think so." Liz Murrill conveniently offered 4 example posters for classrooms to use, and these are the free resources that I talked about, and we're going to take a look at them. So poster 1, the history of the Ten Commandments in the classroom, or the 3 context paragraphs that are required, is on incredibly tiny print right at the bottom. Same with the note about the portraits in the Capitol building and how they all look towards Moses. So I find that funny because nobody will actually read such fine print. So why are you including context if nobody's actually going to read it? I think it's just a way to say this is constitutional without actually opening up a discussion for history. And can we talk about how this poster highlights the Speaker of the House the same as Moses? I mean, no disrespect to Mike Johnson, but it seems like a strange decision when talking about lawmakers. This country specifically has a system of checks and balances, so it's not just one person creating the laws. It's a whole process, and you have a lot of people contributing. So I don't know why we have Mike Johnson here. When we talk about lawmakers, he doesn't make the laws. It's strange to me. And technically, Moses isn't a lawmaker either. He was just the one who wrote down what he received from God, supposedly, according to the story. So neither of these people are lawmakers. I don't get this poster. My verdict is that poster 1 is manipulative and misconstrued. Moving on to poster 2. Again, we have some super small text talking about the history of the Ten Commandments in education. And we also have another note about art, but this time from the Supreme Court building. And here we have a focus on 3 people: Moses, of course, And then we also have William Blackstone, an Englishman who cited the Ten Commandments as foundational for the law, and also John Marshall, one of the early judges in the United States. And I think that the only one that actually pertains to U.S. government and law would be John Marshall. So this poster gets a point for that, and only 1 point. Moving on to poster 3. All right, so we got some fancy new font here. The history of the Ten Commandments is bigger this time, but then again, so are the Ten Commandments. Unfortunately here, the highlighted figures are those who included the Ten Commandments in public school textbooks several years ago. And look at this note at the bottom. It says, this is the version of the Ten Commandments upheld by the Supreme Court in Van Orden versus Perry, but different faith traditions adopt different versions. Now, again, the Van Orden versus Perry is the one about the Ten Commandment monument in Texas. And I couldn't find specifically in the case where it endorses a specific version of the Ten Commandments. It was more about the monument being on government property than about endorsing a specific version of the Ten Commandments. And on top of that, I'm not quite sure what they mean about different faith traditions adopting different versions, because in the Bible alone, no matter what version you look at, there are 4 different versions of the Ten Commandments. So it seems a little bit misinformed. Ultimately, I think this poster is trash. The title says Religion's Role in American Public Education, and then only talks about one aspect of true religions. This isn't a study of the role of religion. This is a study of the Ten Commandments in schools. And again, only through a notably Christian lens, not a Jewish one. So again, trash. And poster 4, this is hilariously awful. The title is The Supreme Court and the Religion Clauses of the Constitution. Does it anywhere talk about supposed religion clauses? No. Does it give an explanation of the Supreme Court decisions? No. But it does conveniently have the Texas Ten Commandment monument front and center with a note that says it is constitutional. The top 2 images are also noted as constitutional. Do you recognize the first one? Yeah, Coach Kennedy. Of course. And the one on the right is the cross from the American Legion versus American Humanist Association case. And the bottom 2 images are of unconstitutional Ten Commandment displays, which is very interesting to me because these displays have only the Ten Commandments. And this is essentially what other states like Texas are promoting in their pending bills. So just a poster of the Ten Commandments. But this poster here, which has been approved by the state and is now law, you can now go print this out and put in public schools. This poster says that these are unconstitutional displays of the Ten Commandments. So other states are saying that this is constitutional, and Louisiana says it isn't constitutional because it doesn't have any historical context. We're just getting opposing views all across the board. I don't know. So those are the posters that have been approved for Louisiana public schools. Now, Georgia is following in Louisiana's footsteps. Legislators have put together a bill requiring the display of the Ten Commandments in schools, but not just the Ten Commandments. These posters would be required to have a historical context section so that they are constitutional, supposedly constitutional, just like the ones that were approved in Louisiana. Quite literally, the required historical context is word for word identical to what is required in Louisiana, and I don't think this is a coincidence. You cannot tell me this is a coincidence. I feel that legislators have seen a way to put Christianity back in public schools, and they are jumping on the chance. This Georgia Bill 313 also explains that schools do not need to use any funds since there will be free resources and or donations. Now, I've already explained why this is unrealistic. Expecting every school to receive enough donations is just not possible. And then even if you get the free resources online, you still have all of the printing costs. This bill differs slightly from the Louisiana one because it requires posters to be slightly bigger, 16 by 20 inches, and it also specifies different locations for the posters. Instead of in every classroom, the Ten Commandments posters must be displayed in locations where they can be easily read by both students and adults. Possible locations include the main entrance of the building, the main entrance of the school library or media center, and the main entrance of the cafeteria. And I honestly think this is worse than having the posters in the classrooms because this is open and overt propaganda. You can't tell me that you're trying to teach students about the connection between U.S. history and the Ten Commandments if you're putting these posters in the main entrance of the school. What goes in the main entrance of the school? That's where you put up things like school pride. You put up pictures of the sports teams. You put up the school colors. You put up things that say, this is our school and we are proud. So if you put up a display of the 10 Commandments at the entrance of your school, you are saying that we are a Christian school, and we proudly say that we are a Christian school. That does not belong in public schools. The reasoning behind this bill is, again, supposedly history. This bill includes the same points as the Louisiana one, plus a few, which I'm going to briefly cover. It mentions the Mayflower Compact of 1620 as America's first written constitution. Now, keep in mind that this was written before the Pilgrims even got to America. You can't tell me that a document written by a religious group before they even got to a specific area is now considered the standard for our government and society. Just because the Mayflower Compact includes a mention of a covenant with God does not mean that the country founded 150 years after it was written should now be focused on biblical principles. This bill also cites the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 because it says that religion and morality are necessary to good government. But what this bill conveniently overlooks is that the Northwest Ordinance also includes in the first article that nobody should be persecuted because of religion. So again, cherry picking information, right? So this Georgia bill, again, just goes to show the incredibly worrisome pattern occurring across the U.S. of legislators viewing and using only the pieces of history that help push their religious agendas. And last but not least, we have South Carolina. And yes, you guessed it, there is yet again a bill promoting the display of the 10 Commandments in public schools. Compared to the Louisiana and Georgia bills, this one is fairly short. It doesn't include a lengthy introduction justifying their twisted reasoning for including the 10 Commandments in public schools. It also doesn't include any size requirements for the posters. It just says that the poster has to be legible. The bill does clarify, though, that schools can use public funds if they don't have any donations or just random 10 Commandments posters laying around. While only 3 representatives originally supported the bill, 9 other representatives signed on as sponsors after its initial reading in January, unfortunately. Also in South Carolina, we have Senate Bill 122, which, if passed, would allow for chaplains in public schools, just like the bill passed in Florida and the one that was shut down in Oklahoma. However, there is one major difference, and it is that the bill in South Carolina would allow schools to employ chaplains, not just bring them in as volunteers. In other words, it would approve government funds be used to bring in members of religious groups into public schools. And again, I have to ask, which faith? If it were up to the school, which type of chaplain would they hire? A Muslim imam? A Buddhist priest? An ordained member of the Satanic Temple? Will there be a paid chaplain from every major religious group? I highly doubt it. I mean, let's be honest, they will probably get Christian chaplains, right? This video looks at one state's legislation regarding education and religion. If you want to watch the whole video about how Christianity is coming back into public schools, check out the link in the description below.